Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought all in all today that we would have a very interesting topic and a very interesting conversation, and hopefully, the sound quality overall is good enough on this video. But, anyways, I thought all in all that I would have this very interesting conversation and that I would make this very interesting comparison. And I don't think all in all that a lot of people are necessarily going to talk about this topic, but I thought I would because I thought that it would be worth talking about. Anyways, before really going into this video, excuse me, because the main comparison and the main topic of this video is going to be a comparison between two very decent fighters in the sport of boxing, but on two very different levels. One of these fighters, in my view, is the clear number one pound for pound boxer in all of boxing right now. And if you've heard my past videos, my prior videos, you know that in my view, at least at the current moment in time, that it is Mr. Canelo Alvarez. And the next fight that Mr. Canelo Alvarez, we all know that he has a very big fight in his hands against that of the Russian fighter Dmitry Bivol. And we all know that a certain amount of these channels, some of the channels that I tend to review here and there, whether it be Champside, whether it be, overall Dante's Boxing Nation, Aki TV, Boxing Ego, some of these other channels, we all know basically the narratives that they try to put out there about Mr. Canelo Alvarez, which basically all in all, if they're not tearing him down one way, they try to tear him down another. And the main reason why that is because they don't want someone like a Canelo Alvarez, especially someone who could be looked at as a Caucasian Hispanic, someone overall who could be looked at as a Caucasoid. They don't want someone overall like that as the number one pound for pound fighter. But overall, don't get it twisted. To be quite honest with you, they don't really overall want any other demographic besides that of the American black fighter usually, or black fighter in general, being that of the number one pound for pound fighter. Excuse me. And even though I don't think necessarily that it's a bad thing to cheer for your own, by any means, and although I don't think necessarily that everything that they say is always wrong, what I will say is this: I don't think that these channels help out a lot of people, especially who are coming into the sport. And that's what, a certain amount of people, they may ask me, they may say, well, why do you review their videos? We know all know that they may be clickbaiters. We all know that they may be biased. We all know this. We all know that. Why do you tend to review their videos? Well, the reason why I review their videos is pretty much for empirical data and pretty much for proof. I'm a very, very, very big believer in the saying overall that I would rather hear it straight from the horse's mouth. And that's why, in these videos, when it comes down to it, even though I will do a lot of videos, also on this channel, where basically I talk pretty much by myself in a video, but here and there, or maybe even a little bit more often than here and there, I do like to review a video, especially with the channel that I tend to disagree with, or a channel or a narrative or an ESPN segment maybe, or something of a sort to where I may see a double standard, or I see someone maybe being hypocritical, or a narrative being pushed overall to where I think there's no context, there's no consistency. The reason why I do that is basically so you guys, not only myself, but you guys, basically can see all the files. You basically can see all the presentations. You basically can see all the empirical data and the proof right in front of your eyes. You basically don't just have to take my word for it. You can take overall their own word for it. So basically, all these videos that basically I like to do, the reason why I like to review their videos is because if I'm overall going to address this topic, and overall the point of the video, or a lot of the points of the video, are going to be, well, I think that this person all in all is having a double standard, or we heard you say this about this fighter, but you didn't say it about this fighter. Basically, what these videos, or what reviewing their videos is meant to do, is basically so you can hear it straight from their mouth. And basically so you can hear their own arguments, and basically the hypocrisy, and basically the narratives that they try to present. That is the main reason why I like to review these videos. But I do understand a certain amount of other people's, mentions of why they would say that. But it is what it is. Anyways, just continuing on, I thought that this would be a very interesting topic to talk about, because we all know that Mr. Boxing Ego, who is a part of the new media cult when it comes down to it, we all know the main fighter that he always tries to tear down, and of course that is Mr. Canelo Alvarez. Now, of course, what new media and the LDBC mainly would have you believe is that Canelo Alvarez, that he's extremely hyped up, not only because he is a debatable Caucasian fighter when it comes down to it, or a Hispanic Caucasian, something of a sort when it comes down to it, or whatever you want to label him as, but when it comes down to it at the end of the day, basically the narrative that they try to feed you is that Canelo, that he faces people coming off their worst performances. And of course, one of the most recent narratives that we've heard is that Canelo Alvarez, apparently a big part of the reason why he unified the 168-pound division is because he was facing these Caucasian fighters. Now, yes, it is true that, of course, he faced those Caucasian fighters. But the question is, were those Caucasian fighters weak fighters? Were they weak champions? Well, basically, that's what Boxing Ego and a certain amount of these other channels would lead you to believe. I'm here overall basically to put more of a logical and objective emphasis on the situation. That's usually what my objective is. And listen, I know the difference overall between a fighter, in my view, that has a legitimate chance to win a fight versus a fighter that overall does not have that much of a legitimate chance of a fight. or does not have that much of a legitimate chance to win the fight. And even though Devin Haney versus George Cambos, in my view, is a very, very decent fight, I don't think a lot of us, at least a lot of us that have both seen George Cambos and Devin Haney face off against certain opponents, I don't personally believe that George Cambos is really an A-plus fighter. That's not me necessarily saying that I think that George Cambos is a weak fighter. If Devin Haney is able to beat George Cambos, I think that he would deserve all the credit in the world. But the question that I basically have is, what is Boxing Ego or a certain amount of these other channels going to say if Devin Haney ends up defeating George Cambos, someone that is debatably not even one of the top 3 most talented guys overall, or even one of the top 5 most talented guys of the 135-pound division? Because if you even listen to a certain amount of these other channels, when George Cambos was potentially going to face Gervonta Tank Davis or Vasily Lomachenko, possibly even Ryan Garcia, a lot of these guys, they don't even know if George Cambos can defeat someone like a Ryan Garcia. So my question is this. If you believe someone like a Canelo Alvarez is facing these weak Caucasian fighters, are you going to give Devin Haney the same criticism? Or are you basically going to say, overall, well, Devin Haney, yes, he's very good, but we don't know how good he's going to be until he faces a Gervonta Tank Davis, or unless he faces a Jose Ramirez or something of a sort, someone who overall is not a Caucasian fighter, or someone who is proved to be 100% the number one guy in their division, who is a Caucasian fighter, maybe like someone like a Josh Taylor. Is he basically going to have the same energy that he had with Canelo Alvarez? I highly doubt it. But we'll see. I don't know what ends up happening. But anyways, let's see what Mr. Boxing Ego has to say. Let's get into it.
Y'all gonna give Devin Haney his credit. And in this video, I will explain why you will give Devin Haney and George Cambos their credit. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. In case you live under a rock, if not, follow me at BoxingEgo1 on Instagram. George Cambos, unified champion. He's out of Australia, Down Under, is fighting Devin Haney on.
It's so interesting all in all that, some of these channels, they try to promote the narrative, especially with Canelo or a fighter that they may not like. They always try to say basically that, especially with Canelo, what do they always say? Well, he faces these European-style fighters. He faces these Caucasian fighters, even if they're not technically from Europe, even if they're from America and they have a quote-unquote black style like a Caleb Plant. What does Mr. Ego and what do some of these other channels say? Oh, well, Canelo Alvarez, he's facing these weak Caucasian fighters. But yet George Cambos, he is clearly a Caucasian fighter from that of Australia. When it comes down to it, Australia is not a country overall or a continent, it's both. It's not really an area all in all that is known for just a bunch of champions. Don't get me wrong, it's had its fair share of champions. You've had, I believe, Anthony Mundine there. You've had Jeff Horn. You had Kostya Tszyu. You had maybe a few others that maybe I'm not, remembering at the current moment in time. But let's be real, Australia is not known as one of the top 5 countries in the world all in all that is known for just winning belt after belt after belt after belt. Here and there, Australians overall have won certain belts or won something in the sport of boxing. But let's be real, no one takes a look at any Australian fighter in history as one of the top 30 boxers of all time. Let's just be real. So my question overall is this. If you believe that Canelo Alvarez is allegedly facing these weak Caucasian fighters, then is Devin Haney, even though he does deserve credit for defeating George Cambos, is he going to get overall basically the same treatment from you if he defeats a Caucasian fighter in George Cambos? One, all in all, that really, if we're gonna go there, is not really even on the same level as Billy Joe Saunders or overall a Caleb Plant like what a Canelo Alvarez fought. It just is what it is. And I know a lot of people, they're going to say, oh, what are you talking about? George Cambos beat Teofimo Lopez. Yes, he beat a Teofimo Lopez, in my view, that if we're really going to put the context behind it, had a very dumb game plan. And I think that he thought that he probably was going to knock George Cambos out within about 7 rounds max. It just is what it is. So at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, yes, you beat Teofimo Lopez when it comes down to it, but let's be real, none of these channels and none of us truly believe that George Cambos, don't get me wrong, if Devin Haney defeats George Cambos, he will deserve all the credit in the world. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, we all know that George Cambos, he's not really someone that, he's not really a A-plus talent. He's someone that, in my view, overall, when it came down to, there's always that old saying, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And I think all in all that fight with Teofimo Lopez and George Cambos was a great example of that. I thought it also was a great example of the Anthony Joshua Andy Ruiz fight. Even though Andy Ruiz, in my view, for his division, maybe you could debate that he's about as talented, if not even more talented than what George Cambos is for his. But if George Cambos goes up against Lomachenko, if he even goes up against Ryan Garcia, I'm not sure if he's going to beat any of those guys. It just is what it is. And I I don't personally believe that it'll beat Devin Haney. That's not me saying that he doesn't have a chance, but I give him about a 30% chance. I just don't think all in all that he has enough athleticism to beat Devin Haney, even though they're very similar in terms of athleticism in my view. But I think that Devin Haney is the more skilled fighter. I think that he's the smarter fighter. And I think all in all that he has the higher peak. So we'll see all in all what happens. But like I said, we'll see all in all Mr. Boxing Ego if he says, well, yes, it's a great win, but we need to really see how you do against Gervonta Tank Davis. Or we need to see how you do, overall against Montana Love or something like that. They're not going to say that with Devin Haney. So what that shows you, and the reason why I review these videos is because certain new people that may be new to boxing or they may check out these channels when it comes down to it, if they see my video when it comes down to it, they can basically see my videos. As Boxing Ego always would say, the good thing about YouTube is that there's always breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs is what he would say, basically meaning what? That there's always a trail, that there's always proof of something that was said in the past as long as you keep the video up. So basically, I have dozens of videos that you can see when it comes down of Mr. Boxing Ego or Dante's Boxing Nation or another one of these LDBC or new media channels, basically degrading a certain fighter that they may not like when it comes down to it. And if you don't believe me, go ahead and check out my prior videos. You can overall look at many of my videos when it comes down. I've reviewed a certain amount of their videos. You can go ahead and take a look at their sayings directly from the horse's mouth. You don't have to take my word for it. So that's the great thing overall. Just like I would say, just like Mr. Boxing Ego would say, our good friend here, the good thing about YouTube is that it has breadcrumbs. And just like Boxing Ego, I have my breadcrumbs as well.
ESPN. This was just reported. Devin Haney took to his social media, and it looks like he pretty much confirmed it. He posted this. ESPN ringside says, breaking news, Camboso's Devin Haney have struck a deal, now trending on Twitter. So this is Devin Haney's page. Bravo. This is amazing stuff. Now, I also put it in the form of my Twitter. So
I agree it is amazing stuff, but what interests me is that, like I said, whenever it comes to a Canelo Alvarez fight, when it comes to Dimitri Bivol or someone of a sort, and like I said, it's just very interesting. Now, once again, I'm not someone that complains repeatedly overall. At the end of the day, you just realize that these people, they're not going to change. They obviously overall not only are trying to get money in a certain amount of these videos, but they obviously have a narrative that they're trying to pull out as well. They are basically trying to, in their videos at least, somewhat systematically tear down Canelo Alvarez because they don't want him there. So basically what they're doing is that they're basically doing a drive-by on his career. So it is what it is,
Follow me at Boxing Ego 1. Let's be clear, Devin Haney's last 2 or 3 fights happened.
But like I said, it's very interesting because Boxing Ego, we all know that in his last video, especially about the fight of Dimitri Bivol and Canelo Alvarez, Dimitri Bivol, who in my opinion would be one of the top 15, top 20 pound-for-pound fighters in the world, someone who's an extraordinarily gifted fighter, someone who is a greater athlete than that of a George Cambos is for his division, certainly someone who is more talented and someone who is more skilled. But apparently, all in all, Canelo Alvarez, what he is doing is facing repeated styles and European fighters and weak Caucasian fighters. No problem if you're going to come up with that point when it comes down. I mean, would I personally agree with it? No, I wouldn't. But if you're overall going to come up with that narrative, then you should also say that Devin Haney is facing a Caucasian fighter who, to be quite honest with you, is probably not even top 4 in his own division. It just is what it is. I mean, in terms of complete talent and skill, it just is what it is. Because I'm sorry, when I take a look at Vasily Lomachenko, Devin Haney, Gervonta Tank Davis, those are 3 guys, in my opinion, right there that would for sure beat Cambos. And that's not even including Ryan Garcia, who maybe would beat him. But I think Ryan Garcia more than likely would. But who knows?
Because, 1, Devin Haney demanded.
So basically the main question overall is this. For a certain amount of the people that may come to my videos and, they may disagree with me, which no problem. We're going to disagree here and there. I have no problem if you disagree with me as long as you have something factual and logical to bring to the table. But at the end of the day, for the certain amount of people that may say, oh, well, you're a hypocrite or you're this, you're that, Boxing Ego and Dante's Boxing Nation, they're just calling out Canelo because they truly believe that Canelo is facing weak competition. So answer me this question. If they truly believe that Canelo Alvarez is facing these weak, quote-unquote, Caucasian fighters, when it comes down to it, why overall is it okay for Devin Haney to face someone like a George Cambos? Now, don't get me wrong, George Cambos overall does have the rest of the belts, but at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez also got all of the belts at 168 pounds. Now, of course, one may argue that David Benavidez was the biggest threat at 168. One may also argue that George Cambos is not even one of the top 3 threats overall at 150, or excuse me, 135 right now. So you can somewhat see the similar situation. So if Devin Haney, let's say for example, let's say all in all that he overall moves out of 135 after he catches all the belts there, and if he goes up to 140, basically not facing a Gervonta Tank Davis or a Ryan Garcia, is he going to get criticism? Are these same arguments going to come out of the woodwork and people basically say that you're not facing the elite black fighter of the division, Gervonta Tank Davis, you're not facing Ryan Garcia, you're not facing this, you're not facing that? Or are they all of a sudden basically going to pull out of their ass that George Cambos was the guy to beat at the time and that Vasily Lomachenko, at the time now is a great talent? And it's very interesting because you can tell that a lot of these guys, like I've said, they're politicians. You can tell that a lot of the things that they say, they don't necessarily believe what they say. You know why? You know how I know that? Because when a person is not consistent, when it comes down to it, it's almost like a child that's in trouble or did something overall to get in trouble. It's basically almost like a child telling a story, and they know that they're about to get their ass whooped by their parents when it comes down to their story basically changes constantly. They have no consistency. And basically that's how you know that these guys, they don't always truly believe in what they're saying. They're just trying to push a narrative. Some of it overall may be money getting when it comes down to it, but a lot of it also might be because they just have a personal vendetta against Canelo Alvarez because they don't like him. All right, they don't like Canelo. They didn't like Vasily Lomachenko. They don't like Tyson Fury. They didn't like Alexander Usyk. When it comes down to it, they don't like a certain amount of other fighters. All in all, that does not go along with their narrative. So it is what it is. And what is their narrative? Basically, their narrative is a pro-black cult. It just is what it is. All right, it is what it is. And if you don't believe me, you can go ahead and take a look at a certain amount of my other videos and see what narratives that they try to push.
Them. The power's in the tongue. Devin Haney said he wanted to fight the best. He's only 23, just like Jordan. He's 2'3". Said he wanted to fight the best. He called out from Ryan Garcia to Teofimo to George Cambosos to Gervonta Davis, I believe he's even called out in the past. Said he wanted to fight them all. And now he's finally getting it. The boxing fraternity hasn't really been nice to Devin Haney, and there's a lot of games and politics that they try to play and keep away to keep him out and boxed out. But
yeah, so you go, speaking about politics, and I've already said this in the past, you're one of boxing's biggest politicians. You have a certain amount of followers when it comes down to it. You're one of the biggest boxing politicians. You don't really help out anyone overall. For the people all in all that may be biased against Devin Haney when it comes down to it, maybe like ESPN or certain of these other guys, you don't overall really help out a whole bunch of other people either. And that's why overall, he has so many pandering fans when it comes down to it. And that's why certain of these other channels, they have so many followers because, like I said, some of the easiest fans overall, or some of the easiest overall people to pander to, are the victims. Because it's really no offense overall against them, but those people are losers. And you overall figure out that, the vast majority of people, at least overall in their mind, they believe that they're losers. And most people overall, would rather overall have an excuse to why something has happened instead of overall having self-accountability. That's why they had a certain amount of videos overall basically saying that Tyson Fury cheated Deontay Wilder and all sort of bullshit when it comes down to it. They always claim, basically, that all this oppression when it comes to, and don't get me wrong, are there certain black fighters, or is there oppression overall against black fighters and black athletes? Absolutely, no doubt about it. But at the end of the day, if you're going to claim all in all that there's a certain amount of oppression against those fighters, or if you're going to be a commentator, it is your job to be logical and objective. And I'm sorry, but that's just not what these channels are. These channels are a pro-black cult. Now, I've seen certain channels overall, in my opinion, that are somewhat decently logical and objective. I think Boxing Wave is a very decently logical and objective channel. I think The Hatman Strikes Back is a very decently logical and objective channel. There's a few other channels that, in my view, are very decently logical and objective. Of course, a certain amount of people have brought up the IBFP. I think that he is a very decently logical and objective channel. But anyone that associates himself with the mark of new media / the LDBC, all those channels usually are a pro-black cult. Even Blue Blood Sports TV to a degree, even though I think that he has a very decent channel, but even Blue Blood Sports TV, at the end of the day, he has a certain allegiance. So it is what it is, But anyway.
You got to give him credit for that because he demanded these fights and now they're happening. But two, there were accidents and fall-throughs from the various promoters that left them with little to no choice. Let me explain. Ryan Garcia was scheduled to fight against Josephjo Diaz. Now, Ryan Garcia said he was going to fight Pacquiao. I want to, it's up to my promoter. He said he was going to fight Gervonta Davis, said he was going to fight Javier Fortuna. He said he was going to fight Devin Haney. None of them fights happened. Then when it got to his fight with Josephjo Diaz, surprise, surprise, he pulled out. And that fight didn't happen. His hand said it was a hand injury, right? So in lieu of that, Devin Haney's team reached out to Golden Boy. Devin Haney's like the Golden Boy's like slaughterer. He fought Jorge Linares. They said one of the first obstacles, they said fight someone in the top 10. He did that. Fought a former champion who beat Luke Campbell, who y'all love when Ryan Garcia beat. And
Now, that's interesting when it comes out. And now, hear what Mr. Boxing Ego just said. Because, of course, if you know the history behind that, and all in all, if you know the context behind that, some of these channels, all in all, they gave Devin Haney a lot of props for defeating someone like a Jorge Linares. If we're being logical and objective here when it comes down to it, let's be real. Jorge Linares was pretty much done at that point in time in his career. He's been mincemeat ever since Vasily Lomachenko ended up knocking him out. And a certain amount of people may say, well, why would you say that? Well, it's very clear. The proof is in the pudding. You know how I know that? Because after the Vasily Lomachenko knockout, Jorge Linares ended up losing 2 other fights. I believe that weren't even to Vasily Lomachenko, or at least 1. Before Devin Haney even fought that of Jorge Linares ended up losing, I believe, in the first or second round knockout to a bum. He ended up losing overall to a journeyman. So people overall basically say, oh, he defeated a former champion. But apparently when someone like Canelo Alvarez or someone overall that they don't like a Vasily Lomachenko, when he defeated a Nicholas Walters or a Guillermo Rigondeaux, we hear nothing but excuses from these guys. Now listen, I don't expect these guys to be logical and objective. I'm not bitching and moaning basically saying all in all that, oh, you guys should be more logical and objective. That's obvious. Listen, at the end of the day, these guys are children. They're politicians. You don't expect overall maturity out of children. You're not going to get these from this channel. What you're going to get overall from these channels are victimization mentality and the pro-black cult mentality. That's all you're going to get from these channels. You don't expect anything higher overall from these people overall that think those type of things about themselves. You're not going to get anything higher from those channels. So it is what it is. The reason why I review their videos overall is to show a certain amount of people what they're truly about, which is pretty much a victim overall mentality pro-black cult. It just is what it is.
Beat Jorge Linares, also dropped Lomachenko. He beat him easily, outside of a little bit of scare in the 10th round last.
Yes, he beat him easily, but where all of a sudden is this narrative, just like you say with Canelo or someone else, to where basically Canelo Alvarez allegedly faces someone coming off of their worst performance. But then apparently when Devin Haney fights Jorge Linares, who was knocked out at least twice within his past 4 fights before Devin Haney fought him, you know, you basically place it in the phrase of he defeated a former champion. So come on.
10 seconds. But other than that, he dominated Linares.
But apparently, you know, Canelo, when he's facing Caleb Plant and Callum Smith and, you know, what the hell was his name? Billy Joe Saunders, all fighters who were undefeated, he basically tries to discredit him and basically say that, oh, well, he was fighting them coming off the worst performance. Which is very interesting because there's also no mention of that when Terrence Crawford fought Amir Khan or Kell Brook, 2 fighters who were very clearly washed up when it came down to it, you know, or fighting Jose Benavidez when he was shot in the knee when it came down to it, or facing Yuriorkis Gamboa when he had a year layoff. You never hear any of those narratives. Isn't that a bitch?
Then he fought
So like I said, for these people that may come on my channel and they may say, oh, well, you're wrong about these guys when it comes down to it. You know, these guys, they just speak the truth on Canelo. No, they don't speak the truth on Canelo. They speak overall what they wish was the truth about Canelo because they don't like Canelo. All right, it is what it is. They don't like. Not only do they not like Canelo, they don't like Tyson Fury. They don't like Vasily Lomachenko. They don't like Alexander Usyk. They basically don't like any other demographic of fighter, especially if they are the main threat. And Canelo is the main king. He overall is the main person in power. He is in rulership. All right, he is the king. That is why they get after him. They don't get after him overall because they 100% truly believe that he's avoiding every fighter. All right, it would be impossible to think that overall, when it comes down to it overall, these guys know, you know, these guys overall don't truly believe that Canelo Alvarez avoids every other fighter out there. You know, and if you don't believe me, like I said, check out my prior videos. Check out my prior videos. And if you truly believe that I'm wrong, no problem. Give me a logical and objective point. I haven't seen one yet overall to counter my debates. But it is what it is. Anyway.
Mentioned Josephjo Diaz Jr. coming off the best recent win of his career since Tevin Farmer, and Jojo Diaz fought a boogeyman of sorts in Javier Fortuna. So Devin Haney, he's undefeated, but he's 2-0 against his last opponents, and they were both Golden Boy fighters. But Ryan Garcia was scheduled to fight Jojo Diaz. Boom, pulls out with the hand injury. Left Jojo Diaz with little choice because Devin Haney's people matched the money he was going to get to fight Ryan Garcia. Said, hey, fight on the zone, which you were already going to do. You're going to get the same money, and it's a chance at a WBC belt. Boom. So Jojo Diaz ended up fighting Devin Haney and losing. And then now it was supposed to be Lomachenko. Bob Arum already told you Lomachenko had the fight with Cambosos. It was a
Yes, and that's going to be another interesting question as well. If Devin Haney ends up defeating Lomachenko, is Lomachenko going to be someone that is overstated? Because let's also be real. Are you going to continue to say that he's overstated? Or if Lomachenko and Devin Haney end up fighting, are you going to say, Devin Haney ended up, let's just say he wins. Devin Haney ended up beating the former number one pound for pound fighter. So let's keep it funky. Let's keep it real. Like I said, there's a very clear narrative. Now, let me also bring this up, and I may bring this up at the end. Because certain people may say, well, you compare Devin Haney and you compare Canelo Alvarez when it comes down to, facing Caucasian fighters. But Canelo Alvarez, at the end of the day, he relinquished certain titles, overall and gave them up to Demetrius Bubu Andrade and Jamal Charlo and yada, yada, yada. And although I believe that that's true because I remember certain events like that occurring, at the end of the day, you can't really get after Canelo Alvarez for facing someone overall like a Caleb Plant or a Billy Joe Saunders, in my view. Fighters all know that, in my opinion, are kind of within along the same brand of those fighters. And I know a lot of people that are not going to agree with that. They're going to say, how can you say that? Because Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant have shown me in the past that they pretty much just have as much boxing craft and ability as what a Jamal Charlo, maybe what a Demetrius Bubu Andrade does. David Benavidez, in terms of boxing ability, those fighters pretty much have around the same, if not even more, boxing ability than what David Benavidez has, in my opinion. The problem is that David Benavidez, he may be a bigger threat just because he's pretty much a natural light heavyweight. But I can't get after Canelo Alvarez for facing someone like a Dimitri Bivol, who, in my opinion, is a bigger threat than Jamal Charlo, Demetrius Andrade, or David Benavidez ever will be and ever would be. It just is what it is. So it's very obvious that these channels, like I said, they have a certain vendetta against him. Because whenever Canelo Alvarez faces a Caucasian fighter, or really whenever he faces whoever in general, they always have a certain excuse overall to why the win shouldn't count that much, or all in all, this fighter was weak. He was facing him off his worst performance. But then apparently Devin Haney facing Jorge Linares, he was facing a former champion. You see how that works? You see overall how they word that? So this is why I review these videos. So you can see it straight from the horse's mouth. So you can see overall their revelations, what they're truly about.
Deal. Bob Arum said, Vasyl Lomachenko, it was done, but he decided to stay in the Ukraine to help his country. Now enter Devin Haney. Since that fight, just like Ryan Garcia and Josephjo Diaz Jr. fell out, Usyk decided, he's a patriot. Bravo to him. And he's going to help out in times of war.
Let me also bring up Mr. Alexander Usyk because there was someone in my comment section the other day that brought up a point that I thought that I needed to address. And he basically said, well, you say all in all that, the Ilunga Makabu versus Canelo Alvarez fight would be good. But then you say that the Alexander Usyk versus Canelo Alvarez fight, that overall is asking for a little bit too much. But yet both are natural cruiserweights when it comes down to it. So why are you saying all in all that one is good and one is not for the other? Basically I think what he was implying that, that that's not a good point from you, or that maybe you're being a little bit hypocritical there. And although I get his point, I don't think all in all that it was the best point available. And the reason why I say that is because basically if you're asking Canelo Alvarez and if you're alleging that Canelo is avoiding Alexander Usyk, and if you're saying he should face a real cruiserweight like Alexander Usyk, that's understandable to a degree. But let's take a look at Canelo Alvarez's stature. Canelo is not a natural cruiserweight. He's not even really a natural light heavyweight. Is he a person that, kind of like Gervonta Tank Davis at the lower weight classes, does he rehydrate very decently high? Does he, rehydrate around 185? Yes, he does. But at the end of the day, some of those cruiserweights, if they're natural cruiserweights, they can rehydrate at around 220 pounds. And Alexander Usyk can rehydrate at about 225 pounds. So basically, what does that mean? That basically means all in all that Alexander Usyk, that he may all in all have about a 30-plus weight advantage over Canelo Alvarez. And you're talking about a person that has an A-plus skill set for his weight division. Basically, that would be asking either Shakur Stevenson or Gervonta Tank Davis to go up to welterweight to face an Errol Spence Jr. or a Terrence Bud Crawford. Because Alexander Usyk for the cruiserweight and the heavyweight division, he's kind of overall, I don't want to compare him 100% to Terrence Crawford or Errol Spence Jr., but he's a person that's an A-plus fighter. And what I'll ask you is this. If you're going to have that same energy with Canelo to face Alexander Usyk, did you have the same energy when Roy Jones Jr. fought John Ruiz and instead did not fight Lennox Lewis? Or was it still a great accomplishment? Because even though John Ruiz, of course, in terms of talent level is not on the same level as Roy Jones Jr., it still was a great accomplishment and somewhat even the matchup because Roy Jones Jr. pretty much is a natural super middleweight. That's the reason why the Ilunga Makabu versus Canelo Alvarez fight, in my view, even though Makabu, I don't think that he's necessarily the greatest of fighters, that's why the matchup is interesting. Not because Makabu is an A-grade fighter, but because Canelo Alvarez is coming basically all the way up from 154. Now, Canelo is at least a natural middleweight, at least. We all know that. And he can carry himself even damn well at 168, maybe 175. But he is overall possibly going to have a struggle against Dimitri Bivol. And if he is able to win a belt in the fifth weight class of cruiserweight, that would do a great overall case not only for continuing his number one pound-for-pound spot, but also his legacy as well. So I thought all in all that I would respond to that response as well.
In the Ukraine, and it left a void. So, to be a man of his word, Cambos said he wanted to fight the best. Boom. And I also, on my Twitter, gave him credit. Credit to George Cambos as well. He's a true warrior. He could have used the Lomachenko.
Well, being logical and objective here, you give credit to both. And like I said, I'm not going to discredit Devin Haney or George Cambos, whoever wins this fight. I don't think that either of them are really A-plus skilled in my view, but I do believe that Devin Haney more than likely is going to win this fight. And if he does end up capturing all the titles, which I predict more than likely that he will, by beating George Cambos, if this fight does go ahead and continue, then I believe all in all that more than likely he will have to enter my top 10 pound-for-pound list. And you're not going to hear me make these bullshit excuses of he's beating a weak Caucasian fighter or he did this, he did that. Listen, at the end of the day, even though I don't think George Cambos, even though I don't think he would win a lot of the big fights there, at the end of the day, he is the man that has the belt. So it is what it is. And at the end of the day, if Devin Haney ends up unifying the division by beating George Cambos, he will deserve all the credit in the world for that. In my view, is it as big of a win as a Vasily Lomachenko or Gervonta Tank Davis win or a Josh Taylor win? No, not necessarily, but it's still a great win nonetheless. So it is what it is.
Fall out to tuck his tail and go the easy route and stay at home and do a tune-up. But he stuck to his word. He said he's not doing like a softer touch, and he wants to fight the best. That's grown man-ish. So hopefully I've demonstrated why the world of boxing should be giving credit to definitely Devin Haney, because he wanted it. It shows you he's not for play. Like he's not just saying this stuff for his health. He's 23 and he truly wants to test himself.
I agree Devin Haney overall does deserve credit. I just find it interesting that some of these channels, when I hear, they basically say that Devin Haney deserves credit for facing George Cambos or some of these Caucasian fighters. But then Canelo Alvarez apparently faces these European fighters, or a fighter that they don't like faces, a European fighter or certain fighters all in all, and they always find a way to discredit them. I just find that interesting.
But also George Cambos, because he's risking it all. Devin Haney could be the favorite. I seen Tim Bradley said that Devin Haney's probably going to be the favorite, but it should be a great fight. Undisputed ESPN. I got a lot more content to come. If you're feeling this video, I do this every day, so subscribe to the channel. In them out. Are you tired of your YouTube?
But anyways, that's really about it for this video. And overall, to make a final point, just in case someone overall were to bring up this point, I thought that I would mention this point as well, because there may be a person that says, well, you're comparing Devin Haney and Canelo Alvarez, but George Cambos is at least the proved unified champion because he beat the man that beat the man. Well, no problem, but if you're going to be a channel like a Boxing Eagle or some of these other guys that basically allege that these European-style fighters or some of these Caucasian fighters ain't the strongest of fighters, when it comes down to in terms of boxing skill, then when it comes down to you should keep that same energy all across the board. Because as George Cambos, when we really take a look at it, is he someone that, even for 135, is he as skilled as what a Dimitri Bivol? Let's even be real on this matter. Is George Cambos even what a Billy Joe Saunders or what a Caleb Plant were at 168? In my opinion, no, he wasn't. It just is what it is. I think that he's a decent fighter, but I don't think all in all that he's on the same level as those fighters. Some people may disagree, some may agree. It just is what it is. But like I said, I can't get after Canelo Alvarez for facing someone like a Dimitri Bivol. But I just thought that was interesting because, like I said, it's very interesting how they demonize someone like a Canelo Alvarez for allegedly facing some of these weak Caucasian fighters. But someone like a Devin Haney, or if someone else does it, that is a part of their narrative, possibly a part of their payroll. When it comes down to it, then all of a sudden they don't criticize them. It's very particularly interesting. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.